a sphere. The Zulu people were the first people to know something that is now attributed to Albert Einstein, namely that space and time are one and the same thing. Zulus knew that long before Einstein was born. They said that one other Zulu name for space is Umkhati. Umkhati, U-M-K-H-A-T-H-I, Umkhati. And they called time Isikhathi. So you can see, sir, that Zulus, supposedly a nation of skin-wearing primitives, were aware of the fact that space and time are one and the same thing. And further, that if you could find the river of time, you could travel into the future and into the past. And many are the ancient legends which are told in Zululand of a man who traveled through time and accidentally killed a young boy who turned out to be himself in the past, and so he no longer existed anymore.
There's an indication on the necklace, I know, around the back that the Earth is round. One of the symbols is indicating that, or a sphere.
Yes.
But I wonder what you think, Credo, of what is taught to children and students all over the world in the universities and the fancy academic centers, that actually we are now at the cutting edge of human evolution in terms of technological knowledge and knowledge of the world and the universe, and in fact back in the ancient world, in Africa and North Africa and all over South America, they were just a primitive people.
Please, sir, that is a lot of poppycock. In fact, in my long investigation into our past, I can tell you proudly that our ancestors were 20 times cleverer than we are. What I feel and what I think, sir, is that in the past, human beings were cleverer than we are today, and that human beings knew more than we know now. We are not progressing, Mr. Ike. We are simply rediscovering things that were known by better men and better women than we are thousands of years ago. I wish to offer you proof of this, some of it at least. Say, there are things that I have found in my travel through the world, things that prove to me that our ancestors were highly advanced in chemistry. Our ancestors had become so clever that they could take science and reduce it to such a simple level that they were able to help hundreds of starving human beings after some traumatic happening in the past.
Let's concentrate on some of the images on the
Yes.
necklace and the symbols, because that leaves no doubt that a lot of knowledge has been around for a very much longer time than we are ever told. First of all, on the hand, I'm seeing the eye. Now, the all-seeing eye and the symbol of the eye is one the Illuminati use all the time. And it's one, of course, that was a very big symbol of ancient Egypt, the Eye of Ra and what have you. Why is that eye there on that hand?
That represents the terrible eye of the Chitauli, the eye which sees everything, the eye which knows everything. It is said that when a Chitauli dies, he passes his third eye onto his next of kin. And To the Chitauli, an eye is a very, very powerful symbol. This is the eye of the Chitauli. But there is more to these things. Here there is a hole that goes right through the copper. Now if you put water in that hole, you end up with a simple magnifying microscope, and you can see gems through that water. The magnification is amazing.
The great symbol that's pointed out again and again on the dollar bill, which is on the reverse of the Great Seal of the United States,
yes,
put on there by the Illuminati, a president called Franklin Delano Roosevelt, is the all-seeing eye. And so is it your understanding that the all-seeing eye, when it's used by the Illuminati, represents this third eye of the Chetahuli?
Yes, I do. I really am sure of this. Why? Because in Africa, even ordinary human eyes are regarded as very powerful devices of magic. If an African shows you respect, he mustn't stare at you, but he must stare at a point beyond one of your shoulders. Now we call this hlonipa, which means deny me your eyes. We believe that when emotionally roused, an ordinary human being can inflict great damage on another human being by the unseen fires that emanate from one's eyes. We believe that a Zulu warrior must never allow his dying enemy to look at him. For example, when a Zulu was killing an enemy, he used to cover that enemy's face with his shield to prevent the enemy looking upon him with his eyes and putting a curse upon him.
It's interesting, people who've experienced the Chetahuli, the reptilians, in relationship to the British royal family and others at various rituals, have said that at the point of sacrifice, the point of death in the sacrifice, that these reptilians stare into the eyes of the person dying, which would kind of fit why those warriors were very concerned about that.
Yes, sir.
What are they doing then?
We have got a ritual, sir, which covers many fields. A ritual which is called ukuthatha umoya, taking away the soul, where when a king is dying and he is fighting to pass on his knowledge and his courage to his successor, he would demand that the successor should stare heavily into the dying king's eyes. And also, when a creature is being sacrificed in Africa, whether it's a human being or an animal, that creature must be stared at by the sacrificer so that its spiritual characteristics are drunk in by the one sacrificing it. Okay. I've seen many times on hunting expeditions in Kenya, Tanzania, and other parts of Africa, when a lion is just about to breathe its last, the hunter, one of the hunters, will stare into the lion's eyes until the lion's eyes start glazing in death. It is drinking in the soul. We believe that the eyes are not just for seeing, that they are for taking as well.
Now, on the hand here is what looks like the symbol of the constellation of Orion. What's the significance of that?
Say, people throughout Africa believe that the original human beings either came from Orion or the gods for whom read the Chitauli and many other alien nasties actually come from that constellation. We call it the constellation of Umhambi, the one who travels very, very far away. And we call this constellation also the constellation of Matsieng, the giant who was sent by God to this earth to create the first human beings. Matsieng was accompanied by a male lion with a very black mane, and he was also accompanied by his dog. And he traveled throughout the world. He first created the first race of human beings, and they were so stupid in appearance that he buried them alive in a cave, and then he created the next race of human beings, which was clever, and we are the descendants of that race.
Also on the hand is what we would call today the Star of David, which of course is not actually a Jewish symbol. It started being used quite relatively recently in that sense, but it's actually a symbol that's been found all over the ancient world. What's the significance of that being on the hand?
There are several interpretations of this very powerful magical symbol. We say that there are actually two universes living side by side. A female universe, which is our universe, and a male universe. And to Sanusis, these two triangles, a triangle facing downwards represents the descending female principle, and a triangle going upwards represents the rising male principle. It is a symbol of the unity of the feminine and the masculine. It is in fact the symbol, a very important symbol of duality.
Is this the kind of shape of spacecraft, etc., or flying craft that the beings from other planets were supposed to have flown in, or not?
No. This, you see, sir, there are various shapes. There are spacecrafts which are shaped like boomerangs or bows. These are very, very, very big. Then there are spacecraft which are shaped like pipes, like huge pipes roughly pointed at either end. And out of those huge pipes come these little things here. Yeah. They are carried inside these huge pipes.
Gotcha.
Yes, sir.
Now, if we could talk about this fella.
Yes.
First of all, the penis and all this stuff, that relates, I would have thought, to the penis of Osiris in Egyptian legend, and the same recurring theme. Would that be along the right lines?
We say that King Samahongo, who is represented here,
yeah,
the lord of all the Chitauri, call them what you will, had his penis cut off by Prince Muari, an African hero, and he replaced it with a golden one. Originally, we are told this thing was made of gold. And now each time when we recall the story of the great marriage between human women and Chitauri men, we unite these creatures symbolically. And sometimes when the necklace is lying on the ground, we make a bed out of animal skin for these two figures, and then we lay them side by side and cover them with a small skin.
So, why are the depictions of the gods, if they were reptilian, why are they not constantly reptilian? Why are they symbolized in other forms?
Because it is very, very, very forbidden to portray a Chitauli as it really is. Only in that large green head do we see a Chitauli represented more or less as it is.
So this was dictated by the Chitauli from the
Yes,
start, was it?
Yes.
All along?
It was. You are not allowed to represent the sons of the python as they really are. Then you are really in trouble. If you want to talk about the Chitauli, you must either play with shadows, you must place an image of a Chitauli against a light and project its shadow onto the wall.
So you've got a fish, I know, on the necklace as well, and fish are scaled. Is this anything to do with the symbolic representation of the Chitauli in a way that they couldn't do it openly?
Yes, there is a particular Chitauli who is called Wowane by our people. Wowane was one of the few good Chitauli, because there are also some good people amongst them. Mm-hmm. And Wowane had a brother called Mpangu. According to one of the great stories, there erupted a terrible war on the red world where human beings had originally been created. And this war was between men and women. Yes. And in this world, men and women nearly decimated each other. But they were rescued by the Earth Mother, who sent a great Nkanyamba, that is a great dragon, to come out of the sky to take them into its stomach and to bring them down to, not to our earth, to a beautiful watery world near the star of the red dog, Injebomvu, which the white people call Sirius, the star of anger. There, human beings were settled, but human beings started eating creatures which they found in the sea, which they thought were fishes, but which were really human beings. Human beings, we are told, started eating the Chitauli who lived in the sea, according to one story. And the Chitauli fought back against human beings. They attacked them with tornadoes, they attacked them with tidal waves, and the human race was nearly wiped out. And then two brothers, two Chitauli youths, Mpangu and Wowane, took pity upon the human race. And they went into the sky and looked for a great egg. And they hollowed out this egg, emptied its contents out, and brought the egg to that world and loaded the surviving human beings and brought them to our world here. We say that Wowane gave us the power of kingship. He brought it out of the sky. And if you notice, in many parts of Africa, ancient kings used to wear a wooden helmet with golden horns. It was true in West Africa, and it was true also in Southern Africa in the great Munumutapa Empire.
This is the horns representing the Chitahuli.
Yes, the power of the Chitauli. Because to a Chitauli, horns are not just for goring other Chitauli as oxen gore each other. No, horns are a symbol of status, and through its horns, a Chitauli is able to communicate with human beings far across the face of the earth.
So the horns were like antennae then?
Yes, they were instruments of projecting power. In fact, it is said by storytellers that King Samahongo punishes those Chitauli who show mercy to human beings by pointing at them so that both their horns fall off their heads. And the Chitauri is therefore unable to direct human affairs through his or her horns.
It's also interesting that the descriptions of the Chitahuli with the horns and sometimes the tail and stuff is very, very close to how Christians and those sort of stories have depicted the devil.
Yes, sir. And one thing that interests me is this, that depictions of the devil have subtly changed over the centuries. But there is a difference now. First, originally, the devil was depicted as a hook-nosed creature, like a caricature of a North African Moor. That was at the time when the Europeans were fighting the Moors as well as the Arabs during the Crusades. Many depictions of the devil then show the devil as having a hooked nose. And then later, somewhere in the 19th century early, the devil was depicted as an African with a snub nose, thick lips, and very dark skin. But what amazes me is that now, more than ever before, the devil is represented as a Chitauli. What concerns me, sir, is this, that these alien creatures are now about to reveal themselves, and they are making us aware of how they look like. If you look, for example, at bioscope films which were made in the 1950s, the 30s, and so on, depictions of space aliens of that time are ridiculous, very laughable, but not anymore, sir. Today, we are having films that depict the grey aliens exactly as they really are, and the Chitauli exactly as they really are. My question is why? Are we being prepared for a major event? And let me share this with you. The group of American people who came to visit me a week or so ago and who left a rather unveiled threat about me shutting up or else my wife will die, who warned me about a certain creature called Eleazar or Melchizedek, that this creature is watching me. These people said this, that on Lake Titicaca there is a hidden beam of light coming from the sky onto the surface of that South American lake, and that on the 9th of September 1999, something very interesting is going to happen at Titicaca. Now, I'm interested to know what this is.
Well, I know from my own travels to that area that there are endless sightings of craft and beings in that area. I've been there twice myself, and I do think, from my own research, Credo, that we are being prepared for these beings to openly be seen.
And being prepared this way, sir, when we do see the nasties, we are not going to react to them with the fear that we would otherwise have reacted. Mm-hmm. Because now what game is someone playing? I think, sir, that they are playing the game that whoever they are, that we should accept these beings and welcome them with open arms, mm-hmm. and make them our masters.
Yet again.
You see, sir, there has been a steady build-up in books, in children's comics, and in other things of the fact that we must accept these creatures. It started with the film E.T., where a cute little alien creature got lost on Earth and fought hard to be accepted by human beings. I think the same thing is on the cards here. The question is why?
One other thing I would just like to raise before we move into the bloodlines and their connection to the Illuminati is one thing that keeps coming up in my work is that some of these Chitahuli, these reptilians, at a high level of their hierarchy are actually white. Have you come across that?
Yes. They are not white like white people. If you take white cardboard and you soak it in dirty water, that is the color you will get. That is the color of the Chitahuli. And wait, sir, let us think carefully about this. According to African storytellers, the Chitahuli have got cold blood. They feel cold very quickly. And where they dwell under the earth, where the great sun god banished them, they dwell there surrounded by great fires because their blood is cold. They freeze eternally. And so if you come across them in their caves, there are many, many cooking fires lit there.
That's interesting, with the symbolism of the devil being in the fires of hell.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And there is another thing. The Chitahuli, their eyes, terrible as they are so efficient that if a Chitahuli appears suddenly into the hot African sunlight, two things happen to him. His skin dries and blisters, and he goes totally blind. In fact, sir, there have been a strange race of aliens which have been seen in Africa, even by white people, which I think are actually Chitahuli. When you run and the thing chases you, it stops immediately when it becomes blind. Another thing, sir, we are told amongst our people that a Sangoma must always have a bogo. This is a sharpened wooden stick which he or she must carry at night. we are told that a sharpened stick is the only weapon by which you can kill a Chitauli.
Well, of course, again and again as you speak, what comes to mind is the story of Dracula, Count Dracula, the stake in the heart, the blood drinker, the blood drinking, which is precisely what this Chitauli and their crossbreed seem to be into.
But it is not just any wood that you must use against a Chitauli. We believe that Rhodesian teak, a wood which has got a strange bitter taste, is the one type of wood that is poisonous to the Chitauli. And down there, you see a long stick that I am carving in preparation for the year 2000. I might not be alive to see the year 2012. But this sticks, which I've been working upon for the last 5 years, is going to be the one stick which my successor will carry, and it will end in a sharp point. This wood, Rhodesian teak, is the wood that we say can actually kill a Chitauli. And where the Chitauli are found, you find Rhodesian teak or any other teak trees either being felled in large quantities or being pushed over by elephants. May I point out to you, sir, that many of the trees that are being destroyed in the Amazon jungle and in the Southeastern Asian jungles, as well as in the African jungles, are teak, the one wood that the Chitauli fear. And while on the subject of wood, the only mask that can protect you against a Chitauli is a mask made of teak. And in some of the flea markets around Johannesburg, I'm seeing more and more masks carved in Mozambique and in Zimbabwe, representing a Chitauli. The eyes are huge, round, with slits through which a person can see, and the lips are non-existent, and so is the nose. I've seen hundreds of such masks being sold by curio sellers in the streets.
One of the other things that comes up in terms of the way they look is the domed head. Now, I was in Egypt recently and saw depictions of Nefertiti and the Akhenaten family, and they had big domed heads. Is this a connection?
Yes, sir. You see, we human beings tend to imitate those creatures that we call gods. It's going on even now. When African women saw white people, they named them Abelungu, which literally means the gods. And today, in America and in Africa, black women and some black men are going out of their way to give themselves hair which is European and not African in character. Now this thing it dates back thousands of years. First of all, the one race of the Chitauri, the ones that are called Nomo or Nomo by the Dogoni people, are depicted as having beard-like growths of the same type that look like the beards of Egyptian pharaohs. They are shown having it is said so that when a chitauri gets very old, after tens of thousands of years, he or she develops a bone-like growth under the chin which twists around like the horn of that kind of fish-like creature I saw in Europe in a picture called a narwhal. And this thing curls up this way. Now, Egyptian pharaohs used to wear beards like that. And some African kings wore beards like that, real beards or even false beards made out of ivory or out of the tusk of a warthog. And there was a time definitely in history when African kings as well as Egyptian pharaohs went out of their way to imitate the appearance of the chitauri. Queens like Nefertiti had their faces misrepresented by the court painters. They looked exactly like the chitauri as near as possible. The high cheekbones, the drooping chin, the unusually large head. African sangomas, African inyangas, ancient Egyptian pharaohs, all of them used to wear headdresses that made their heads look much larger than they actually were. If you look, say, at the crown, certain crowns worn by Egyptian kings, the whole head, the crown, is intended to be an extension of the pharaoh's head to give the pharaoh an appearance of above average intelligence. In Africa, we had kings who favored headdresses made out of the scrotums of elephants or rhinoceroses or even buffaloes. A scrotum which was dried and made bulbous and worn on the head by the king to make his head look larger than it was. And lastly, in ancient Greece, at the time when Greece reached the great heights in its culture and civilization, the great ruler Pericles used to wear a special soldier's helmet with a bulbous skull, a helmet which made his head look much bigger than it really was.
Do they still do that today? Are there still African traditions that do that today?
Yes, very much so. And in America, some Native American shamans used to wear a special hat made out of the head and the horns of a buffalo, which also made the man's head look bigger than it is. Say, popes, the Pope in Rome wears a hat which is intended to show him as having a brain bigger than average. That crown which has got three crowns, one on top of the other one. And now, bishops, especially in the Greek Orthodox Church, they wear crowns like that. And the Tsar of Russia, one of the Tsars, wore a bulbous crown which was in two sections, which made his head bigger than it really was. And in Persia, in Iran, some ayatollahs wear a turban whose effect is to make the man's head look bigger than it is. So does a Sikh. And so, for that matter, to the ancient priests of Israel, they also wore an onion-shaped headdress, whose impression was to give him a far and above size head.
Aren't there also traditions in which they manipulate children's heads as they're growing so that they become more bone-like?
Yeah. During my travels in Africa, sir, I came across an amazing people whom you must visit. They are called the Mangbetu people, and they live near Lake Rudolph in Central Africa. They are a beautiful, aristocratic people. And what they don't know about the universe is just not worth knowing. The Mangbetu people believe that an elongated skull with a flattened forehead pleases the gods. They flatten the skulls of their children, causing constant headaches to the child even when the child has grown into adulthood. And I asked a beautiful Mangbetu woman, "Madam, why do you torture your children this way?" The woman, the wife of a senior chief, said to me, "Look, the gods want us to be like this."
Story that you're telling, Credo, from the African perspective, is it in effect the same story as told in the tens of thousands of clay tablets found in what we now call Iraq, who become known as the Sumerian tablets, that talk about a race of gods called the Anunnaki, who came in and brought knowledge, ruled the people, and interbred with them?
Yes.
Do you say, therefore, that the Anunnaki in those stories that have increasingly, of course, been translated in a number of books, yes, they were reptilian, you say?
Say, all I do know is this, that here in South Africa, amongst the Xhosa people, amongst the Zulu people, there are beings who are very revered even now, and they are called Amanuna or Amanono. Amanono is Zulu, Amanuna is Xhosa. Now these beings are godlike beings, we are told. They can change their faces. They can change their appearance.
They can shapeshift.
Yes, sir. They are shape shifters. A manuna, now if a Xhosa man has married a very beautiful wife, a wife whose face seems to change every day, he teases that wife by calling her his inuna, linuna lam. In other words, a shape shifter. Say, it is said that the people who are closest to the hearts of the Manuna gods are women. And why? Because the women give to the Manuna the power of, they worship the Manuna, they hero worship them, which explains why Nefertiti wanted herself to look like one of them, and her children too. She was actually hero worshipping these creatures, and the how you say, women say, are copycats, and I'm not being sexist when I say this. Women will copycat any being that they think is supreme.
In Egypt also, you have the python-like headdresses, which are pretty obvious when you look at them, that the pharaohs were connected with.
Yes, sir. And the reptile has played an unusually strange part in the culture of all African tribes. For example, it is my suspicions that we black people of Southern Africa are going to be deprived of our nationhood in the very near future, and that we are going to be ruled by people of Uganda. But wait, what is the real meaning of the word Baganda? Baganda. And what is the creature that you see depicted on the walls of houses and on the roofs of houses of some of the greatest empires in Africa? It is the python. There was a golden python which was used as a decoration on the roof of the house in which the king of Benin, the Oba, lived. Zulu people revere the mamba, a very terrible snake. Zulu people revere other snakes as well. And in Venda, in the northern Transvaal, the Venda people regard the snake as well as the crocodile as sacred. And they, even today, their girls dance at initiation, a long, rather sinuous dance representing the movements of a python. And they call that dance the Domba dance. And Domba is the ancient name for a female python.
Well, wherever you look, all over the world, whether it's the Maya of Central America, you look at South America, Africa, anywhere, the symbolism of the snake, the crocodile, the representation of the reptilian is there. You go into Europe, and the Illuminati created cathedrals like Notre Dame in Paris. You've got the stately homes of the aristocracy, etc., with the gargoyles, the reptilian figures. It's been in our face, but we just somehow have had a blind spot to see it.
We human beings have idolized the reptile since the very supposed birth of our history. Go even further, much further. What was the creature which was honored by the ancient Greeks in their Delphic oracle? The python. What is the creature that stands next to the figures of the goddess Athena? The python. No matter where you look, go to China, where I once went. Who are the principal characters who brought wisdom to humankind? Creatures, part snake and part human being. One of whom I remember correctly was called Nu, a word which occurs also in Africa. And her brother was Kwa, and sometimes it's turned into one creature, Nukwa, she. Everywhere we human beings have sacrificed our dignity as a species and attributed great intellect and great glory to reptiles, tortoises, turtles, lizards, snakes. Why? And even now, our fascination with the reptile and the amphibian has not stopped. In fact, it's growing. The popularity of all those dinosaurs, in cartoon as well as in serious form, it makes me uneasy.
If we could just pick up this line of bloodlines, which the Sumerian tablets talk about, which you talk about, the interbreeding of humanity, and how the accounts explain that these crossbreeds were put into the positions of royal ruling power, almost as like demigods, middlemen between the gods, the Chitahuli, the reptiles, and the people. Those bloodlines, in my own research, became the European royal families and aristocracy, and today are the ruling banking, business and political and royal lines of the world. And the genealogy supports this increasingly. Is there a tradition also that the royal lines of Africa go back to the same source?
Please, you don't have to believe me. Go to Rwanda and there talk to the people there. They will tell you that the founding ancestors of their dynasties, the first kings who came from the sky, and they were called Imanugela, the ascending ones. Say, many African tribes believe that when the gods came down from the sky, they found human beings very, very stupid. And the human beings could not come before the gods in order to be taught. So what the gods did, and this is a story that you also find amongst the Dogoni people in West Africa, because the human beings were afraid of approaching these reptile gods. The reptile gods cold-bloodedly slaughtered one of their number and shed out its flesh with a specially gathered crowd of human beings. And these human beings then became the ancestors of our first great kings. Now say, African kings jealously guarded their blood.
If the royal lines of Africa claim descendants from the same source, basically, have those lines interbred as obsessively as the European aristocracy and royal family, and not bred outside of those lines?
Yes, sir. Royalty had to marry royalty. That was one of the strictest laws in ancient times.
Which is obviously where we get the term the divine right of kings from. It's not actually God, it's actually the gods.
Yes, sir, yes. Royalty intermarried with royalty. You were not allowed to take a commoner as your senior wife if you were a king. You could take commoners after your senior wife.
Once the genetics has been achieved.
Yes, sir. Now, another thing, it is like the Sangomas. Very, very strictly speaking, a Sangoma who was sometimes viewed as a king or a queen was not allowed to marry outside her caste or his caste. Sangoma had to marry Sangoma, otherwise the non-Sangoma blood would pollute the god blood inside the Sangoma.
The lady that I've quoted in my books, Kathy O'Brien, who wrote her own book, Transformation of America, about being a mind-controlled slave of the American elite, she talks in there about seeing George Bush as president and vice president shapeshift into a reptile. And so many other people have told me this story of world leaders today changing into reptiles in front of their eyes and then changing back again. And Miguel de la Madrid, the president of Mexico at the time of George Bush, said to Kathy O'Brien, as she quotes in her book, that a reptilian extraterrestrial race interbred with the ancient Central American people because they needed to create bloodlines through which they could operate.
Yes.
And he said that these bloodlines were, in effect, today's world leaders. Does it fit with your knowledge, Credo, that the royal lines of the Chitahuli reptilian human interbreeding that become the demigods and the royal families, etc., that they have gone on in Africa as well as the rest of the world to become the ruling lines and the ruling people of these countries.
Yes, many of them have. In fact, some of Africa's most terrible warmongers, men who have drenched large areas of Africa in unnecessary blood and suffering, are directly descended from some of our greatest emperors of 600, 500, or even 1,000 years ago.
Just as the American presidents are.
Say, I would like to tell you about a man called Jonas Savimbi. Jonas Savimbi is a descendant of some of the greatest Angola kings. In fact, the entire land called Angola was a breeding place of kingship in Africa. The word Ngola means a king, and Angola means land of many kings.
I must say, the way that the evidence that I'm uncovering is going, and it's going there very fast, and it syncs so much with what you're saying, is that a race from the stars, a reptilian race, interbred with humanity, they created crossbreed bloodlines, which became the middlemen, the demigods, the royal kings and lines and ruling power in the ancient world. And through interbreeding has become the presidents, the ruling people at the top of the power structures of banking, of politics, of the military, of all areas of our lives, of business, all of it. Is that the way that you have seen it yourself?
Yes, sir. You know, Mr. Ike, I wish for one moment I could contradict you. But for the last 40 years, I have observed an extremely disconcerting phenomenon in South Africa and in other parts of Africa as well. And this is the phenomenon. You find a rising black leader, a real leader amongst men, a ferocious activist for the rights of his people. This man starts something, whether it's a revolution or whatever, he starts it. And you look at his ancestry, because in Africa we look very closely at a man's ancestry. And you find that this man is nothing. Although he is doing such great deeds, he is actually a descendant of very peasant people. Ow. And you are worried. And all of a sudden, this black man will come to a sudden violent end, and a person who is totally new will take his place. And when you look at the ancestors of these people, this man, you find that he, or even she, is a person of very, very ancient African royalty. Now, let me show you. There was this war in Rhodesia, and many people got killed there. And there was a very fierce and dedicated general. His name was Tongogara. And Tongogara fought in Rhodesia. And just when victory was won, Tongogara was killed in a terrific explosion. Somebody put a bomb thing in his car, and killed him very badly. But wait, Tongogara had been a descendant of a blacksmith. His surname, Tongo Gara, means powerful hammer. Now, who replaced Tongogara? A man called Robert Mugabe. Now you can't get more royal than that. Mugabe is descended from ancient Mashona kings, and what is more, he knows it. Always a leader is removed, and when the power really comes, a new leader descended from some faraway monarch or tribal chieftain 2 centuries or 3 centuries ago comes on the scene. Again and again there seems to be this particular force which elevates its descendants over ordinary human beings. I can give you hundreds of cases of this. Now say, talk about a tradition of shape shifting. African kings, even now, and even ordinary tribal chieftains, especially in times of crisis, often spread the story through the land that they are able to change shape at will. There was a time when the South African government created the various Bantu homelands. And these homelands were ruled by those tribal chiefs who were agreeable to the apartheid system. Now, some of these chiefs were very unpopular with the people on the ground. And so, to build a charisma around themselves, these chiefs used to tell people that they are capable of changing shape at will. It was spoken about a certain African chief in the Transkei who became one of the first rulers of one of several black homelands there, that one day his enemies were looking for him to assassinate him, and when they broke into his house, they found a huge lion sitting on the floor, and this lion growled at them. And because of that story, because even today word of mouth is a very powerful media of communication in black communities, all enemies of that particular chief left him well alone because they feared his shape-changing powers.
The final question on this particular video, Credo,
Yes,
because we've got a lot more to say on others. Why is it that if the Chitahuli are all around us, which I certainly feel they are, and they're operating for certain bloodlines, now some people see them shapeshift. That's absolutely without doubt. I mean, so many people I've met all over the world have seen it. Into reptiles and then back again, the George Bushes, the Henry Kissingers, these key people. Why don't most people see it?
First of all, sir, I have said to you, Mr. Ike, that we human beings have got a blind spot in our brains. And this is what the Chitauli and other alien nasty boys are exploiting. Look, sir, if we are a crowd and we are standing on a city street, we will see a man suddenly grow an extra arm. And many of us will see that, but will refuse to accept what they have seen. I have seen, say, people going through severe trauma in train accidents, in car accidents, but they refuse to accept what they went through. I have seen women who have been raped several times, ferociously refusing to admit what they underwent. I've seen it many times. And these alien creatures know our weakness. They know that very often we human beings tend to censor what we see. If you are an educated professor and you see a spook, your educated mind will refuse to accept what it has seen. You will reject it and throw it to the back burner of your brain, and it will stay there. Hundreds of us see very strange things every day, but we refuse to accept what we see. Say, one of the things that a trainee Sangoma has got to learn, it is the ability to see. If I am standing here and looking at that bush over there, and I see something odd there, I must know what I've seen. But wait, sir, there is something else, something very, 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 very important, which I and many other thinkers in Africa have found. Mr. Ike, whenever you talk about such things, people call you paranoid. Mm-hmm. But no, you are really more sane than they really are. Say, there are certain vaccination things that are done to our children which rob them of the ability of seeing spiritual entities. Believe me, I can prove this. In Zululand, we were sometimes called before our chiefs, our inkos, and we were told that there is a great smallpox coming to the land and that all children must be vaccinated. Do you know that my mother's father, my grandfather, used to dodge that? He said that the white man's mjovo, the white man's vaccination, makes you blind. And if you are to look after my cattle, you must not go to the trading store to get your vaccination. But wait, the school inspectors used to come into the land and check each child for signs of vaccination or lack of it. Now, do you know what we used to do, Mr. David Icke? Our grandmothers used to give us great pain in order to save our spiritual eyes. They used to hit grains of maize, and then they would hit this grain of maize, and using a piece of wood as tweezers, place it firmly against the skin of the child. So when the school inspector came, he saw these blisters and assumed that the child had been vaccinated, but in fact it had not. And this was done to us many, many times. And I noticed that school children in mission schools who had been vaccinated for smallpox or for measles could not see spiritual entities at all. A ndondo, that is a flying saucer, a spuputeg, would fly through the sky at great speed and be seen by many men and women. But the child who had been vaccinated would see nothing. And I noticed this hundreds of times.
Well, what you've just said about vaccines and their effect on shutting us down spiritually and multidimensionally is fantastic, given that no matter what your background, creed, culture, parents on every inch of the planet almost are being pressurized to have their children vaccinated more and more and more. And to summarize what you've been saying, and indeed it's so much in line with what I've come to the conclusion about as well, an extraterrestrial race, reptilian race, disconnected us from our true magnificent senses in a long, long ancient world. They've been manipulating us ever since, and the more that time has passed, the less we've realized this is going on. And now we're at a point where we are in a prison without bars, a massive prison, and we don't even know we're in prison. We don't even know the jailers are. Indeed, when the jailers are exposed, people just laugh and ridicule and all that stuff. So we're in an unbelievable situation. And we're in a jail we deny we're in. And there are jailers we deny exist. And we call it freedom.
Yes, sir. Yes. You know, Mr. David, one of the reasons why I've joined forces with you is because I have serious reason to believe, and I will repeat these words until somebody shuts my mouth in death. I have serious reason to believe that on this planet, things are coming to a head, and our invisible jailers are going to fight tooth and nail to prevent this. Say, our people say that the blackest night often heralds the brightest dawn. The human being, captive as he is, slave as it is trying to fight back, sir. And this is where the crunch is going to come. I believe that we are not far away from the bloodiest crunch in the world. And I will tell you, my visions tell me that we are going to be struck with the most terrible sword of all, the sword of money, sir. Something is going to be done to money which will bring us all to the level of beggars. And do you know why, sir? Let me tell you. I used to work for big game hunters in Kenya. And one of them was an Italian gentleman. This Italian gentleman was such a powerful hunter, a white hunter. He used to shoot 2 bull elephants a day in Kenya, and he used to celebrate the shooting with a huge bottle. He called it a magnum of wine. I remember him pouring some of the wine onto the heads of the dead elephants. And then one day we went with this man to the land now called Rwanda, which used to be called Rwanda Urundi. We went up the mountain, and there, accompanied by pygmies, he shot a gorilla, a huge ngangi with silver fur all along its back. And the great beast died so bravely that this Italian hunter started weeping like a woman. He fired us, told us that the job is finished, and he never hunted again. Sir, what I'm trying to tell you is this, that something inside us human beings is beginning to fight back against the Chitauri. Something inside us human beings is beginning to say no. And the Chitauri are going to drag us all right into hell itself in order to restore their power over us. Let me show you. Who would have thought in the 1950s, during the time of the Cold War, when everybody was expecting a bloody Third World War between Stalinist Russia and the Western nations, when British, American, and even Russian nuclear bombs were exploding all over the place. Who would have thought that a few decades after that, there would come a time when a group of young men and women, the people of Greenpeace, would sail their ship, the Greenpeace Warrior, into a nuclear zone to prevent the French from testing one more atomic bomb. This tells us that something inside the human soul is fighting back. 40 years ago, it was once a very glamorous thing to kill animals. Today, a big game hunter like my Italian friend would never dare show himself in some hotels. He would be spat at and he would be beaten up by people because the hero of yesterday, the Bwana Banduki, the gun Bwana of 40 years ago, is today a murderer. Now, things are coming to a crunch. 40 years ago, nobody cared a damn about the environment. People did not even know that there existed such a thing as an environment or a food chain. Today, there are people who would rather lose their lives than not save a buck which is drowning in a river. A God is being born inside us, all of us. But herein lies the danger. We must be aware of the Chitauri. They are real entities. They leave scars on human bodies. They kill people. They are murdering South Africa even as we are talking now. Every word you and I are speaking now is spoken too late, Mr. David Icke. AIDS is rampaging through our communities. And I have found a new disease in Botswana, which nobody is talking about even. It is 20 times more vicious than AIDS. It is called Ebola. Oh my God. And we must please be aware. Let nobody laugh when we talk about conspiracy theories. But there is one thing, sir, that I beg that you and others like you should discard una momento, as they say in South America. Stop calling the conspiracy a theory, sir. Theories do not kill people, Mr. David Icke. Theories do not murder innocent children. Theories do not put multiple murderers of Kabila's stripe into power in countries.
Absolutely.
Theories are just ideas floating in the air. The conspiracy is real. It is there and it kills.
The staggeringly intelligent, the staggeringly wise, and the staggeringly knowledgeable Credo Mutwa. And his knowledge the world needs to know. Not only is Credo a man who has gathered this enormous knowledge together, he's a man with the courage and the foresight and the wisdom to know that the world needs to hear this, even though most of the world, particularly those who run the world, don't want anyone to hear this. But if we're going to be free, and we are, then we need to know all there is to know, and not just that which the few want us to think is the world, when a very different world is unfolding all around us every day. In the next video, we're going to be taking the story on with Credo and showing how these reptilian bloodlines and this Chitahuli, this reptilian group, expanded their power, crossed the world, took over Africa and other great continents, and today are the ruling elite that controls planet Earth. And by knowing that, and by knowing how it's done and how it works, we can take control and power back into our lives from those who have controlled us and this planet for thousands of years. It's a great time to be alive. From Africa for now. Thank you, and thanks for listening to A Remarkable Man. Hello and welcome for a second time to Africa, the countryside of South Africa, just outside Johannesburg, for the second in our series with Credo Mutwa, the Zulu Sanusi, or shaman, as many people around the world would call him, the keeper of the history, the true history of Africa and the Zulu people, and the official storyteller, in other words, the carrier of the knowledge and the symbolic stories of the Zulu nation. He is, without any question in my mind whatsoever, the most remarkable, astonishing man it's been my honor to meet. And to share his incredible knowledge has been a time I personally will never forget. In the first of these videos, we discussed with Credo the story of the Chitahuli, the reptilian extraterrestrial race from another world that came to the earth in the far ancient world, that brought advanced knowledge which built many of the, according to conventional history, unexplainable, magnificent structures all across the world, thousands and thousands of years old, and also interbred with humanity, creating hybrid crossbreed bloodlines. These bloodlines, as my own research for books like The Biggest Secret and Credo's immense knowledge of the African history, which he's gathered in his nearly 80 years of traveling this vast and amazing continent, both correlate the same story, remarkably, that this Chitahuli, this reptilian race, interbred with humanity, and the bloodlines became the almost demigods, the royal ruling lines of the ancient world, particularly in the ancient Near and Middle East, which were the middlemen, if you like, between the extraterrestrial gods to which people were literally sacrificed and the people in general. And as the genealogical research is showing, these crossbreed bloodlines, the Nephilim, as the Old Testament of the Bible calls them, the result of the interbreeding between the sons of God, as the Bible calls them, the sons of the gods in the true translation, and earth women, the marriage, the bringing together of the sons of God and the daughters of men. This Nephilim crossbreed race, as the genealogy has shown, came out of that area
and into Europe to become the aristocracy and the royal families of Europe, and then through the British Empire became the ruling bloodlines of most of the world. In fact, today, almost all of the world. Like the 42 presidents out of the hundreds of millions of people who have been Americans since the Declaration of Independence in 1776, 42 have become president. They're all related. What? And they go back to these ruling aristocratic families, which eventually go back to the crossbreed, inter-relationship, intercourse between the Chittahuli, the Anunnaki, as some accounts call them, and human beings. And it's the British Empire that we're going to talk about now in its relationship to taking over the planet in a way that today is now global. The British Empire became the British Empire because this network of bloodlines, which had become known as the Illuminati, centered itself in London at operational level, particularly after the arrival from Holland of William of Orange, who became King of England in 1689. And from that time, he signed the charter that created the Bank of England, and the banking system as we know it started to expand and emerge. But from that time, the British Empire and the other European empires came into being, and they took the planet over. Now, one immensely important area that they completely controlled and raped was the fantastic continent of Africa. And to look at how Africa was taken over by this Illuminati, Chittahuli, reptilian crossbreeds, and indeed the reptilian race itself that's behind it all, is to see how the world has been taken over, the methods used, the way it was done, the manipulations. And what we're going to talk to Credo about now, among many other things, is the way that the continent of Africa was hijacked by the Illuminati. And I asked him first to tell me the story of how this great continent was taken over.
So, there are mysteries in this world that we as thinking human beings must look into. And one of these mysteries is this. There is overwhelming evidence of the fact that before Africa was actually colonized by the white people from Europe, it was first prepared by strange people for this colonization. When the first Portuguese ships started sailing around the Cape of Good Hope, strange beings appeared amongst our people, strange human-like creatures, usually creatures of great height, abnormally tall, human-like beings, some of them with only 1 foot, appeared amongst our people, and they started doing things there which made it easier for the colonialists to invade us and to conquer us.
What were they like in terms of their color and skin, Credo?
Say, we do not know, but there are those who described them as very, very white, chalk white in appearance. This went on for so often that it became traditional to our people to represent these beings with white chalk. You found masks amongst our mask makers which were smeared entirely in white chalk to represent these creatures. These creatures were usually about 8 feet tall, very, very slender, and they used to wear robes made of the tanned hides of certain type of antelope, usually the intensely black sable antelope.
What name did the people give to them?
We gave them the name Izilo Zengubo, the beasts of the terrible blanket. These creatures were dressed exactly like Christian monks, with hoods and long robes. In fact, I will draw you a likeness of one of them as it is shown in a rock painting. Now, these creatures used to live in holes in the ground or in underground caverns or in gullies over which a roof of logs and vegetation as well as sods was placed. And it may be of interest to you, sir, that Portuguese explorers and Portuguese seamen used to see these one-legged creatures hopping about and sometimes disappearing into the ground as if by magic. And these creatures were called by the Portuguese sailors monopods. They wore a long robe that reached down to their ankles, and they appeared as they moved through the bush as if they only had one leg. Monopods were seen in Africa, and they were also seen in America before America was colonized by the white people.
Among the Native Americans?
Yes, sir. One of the things that amaze me is that the story of America and the story of Africa was the same. It is said, sir, that these monopods introduced certain knowledge to our people. They actually prepared our people mentally for what was to come. For example, these monopods, these beasts of the terrible blanket, used to wear a cross-like ornament on their chests as a charm, a cross made of either gold or silver. Doesn't it amaze you that when the Native Americans saw the cross painted on the sails of Christopher Columbus's ships, they recognized it as a sacred object? Let me tell you, sir, exactly the same happened in South Africa, where our people were made familiar with the cross long before the white man set foot in Africa. And when our people saw this cross, this time brought by missionaries, they recognized it as a sacred object. In other words, now, I don't know how to put this there, but can you put it for me? Our people were prepared long beforehand to recognize certain Christian symbol and Judaic symbols. And when they saw them in the hands of the colonists later, they saw them for what they were. This is one of the reasons why, Mr. Ike, Africans accepted and protected Christian missionaries, even while fighting a life and death struggle against white colonialism. How is it that a man would accept the religion of an invader while at the same time fighting a life and death battle against the encroachments that this invader was making into his native land? This happened in America, and this happened in Africa, and the sources of this acceptance were the same. I wish I could put this in much better English than I'm using now, because I feel it is important.
I think you're putting it very clearly, that it seems that this Chitahuli were going around the world preparing for the occupation from the Illuminati Center in London and Europe of these various areas like Native America and Africa.
Yes, sir. The story, you see, a great fraud is being committed in educational circles, in that the educationists in their ivory towers force our young people to look at the colonization of Africa and America as if they were two separate incidents. But certain factors in this colonization were the same in Africa and the same in America, and they achieved exactly the same results. This is why I always argue that the conspiracy, the international conspiracy, began long before colonial times in Africa and in the Americas. And the results were the same. Look at this. Here is the great Zulu king, Shaka. Shaka is a warrior second to none. Shaka is also a prophet second to none. Shaka welcomes white people to his empire of Natal. Shaka allows missionaries to operate freely through his country. And when Shaka dies, before Shaka died, he warned his half-brother Dingaan that he must under no circumstances attack the white people, and that he must allow missionaries to operate freely amongst the Zulu people. In fact, during the reign of King Dingaan, Shaka's half-brother, two missionaries, Reverend Halstead and Reverend Owen, had a mission station within sight of King Dingaan's great village. But wait, sir, let me point out one thing. These missionaries were converting our people to Christianity, and they often went out of their way to criticize and undermine the king's authority in the eyes of their converts. In other words, we have an amazing phenomena here where a great king is being undermined by the very people he has allowed to preach freely in his country. Why? Not a single South African scholar has ever asked himself why? Why were our people so seemingly stupid as to allow a foreign religion into their country? Now, let me show you two horrendous tragedies. When the Belgians colonized the Congo, which is today the Democratic Republic of the Congo, King Leopold declared that the Congo was to be his personal property. And King Leopold and his men tortured and murdered several million black Congolese people in an act of genocide equal only to what the Nazis were later to do to the Jews. But under savage ill treatment, under savage torture and humiliation, the Congolese, virtual slaves in their country, still respected Christian missionaries and followed them and gained hope from them. And in 1907, this time in the country today known as Namibia, the Germans embarked on a policy of genocide against the warrior people known as the Hereros. They murdered so many Hereros. They tortured and slaughtered so many men and women of that nation that until as recently as the 1940s, Herero women were still so traumatized by what had happened that they were not producing any young at all. But in spite of the hideous genocide committed by General Van Trotha, in spite of the multiple murders, the Herero people clung to the Christian faith. Why? Exactly why? I now come to my people, the Zulus. When King Dingaan murdered the Voortrekker leader Piet Retief, the act was watched by Reverend Owen and Reverend Halstead from their mission station, which was built on a hill overlooking King Dingaan's great village. Halstead and Owen, unharmed by Dingaan, decided to flee from the place after that. And Dingaan was deeply sorrowed that his favorite preachers had decided to leave him. And King Cetshwayo, the warrior king who won the Battle of Isandlwane in 1875 or thereabouts, never harmed missionaries. And a king who followed Cetshwayo, King Dinizulu, who was brutally tortured by the English, had a great friend in Bishop Colenso, a Christian bishop, and his daughters, one of whom was called Mary. Although he had suffered so much at the hands of the British authorities, King Dinizulu never abandoned his white Christian friends. They comforted him, and he depended desperately upon them and their Bible in his darkest hours.
Would the same basic story, Credo, be true of how the British or the Illuminati based in Britain took over Australia too?
Yes, I have found exactly the same stories. The Aborigines, like Africans, were deliberately softened up long before they were colonized by the white people. There were men, mysterious men, who often posed as gods, who undermined the will of the Aborigines to resist the encroachment of the colonialists.
It's also interesting that Captain Cook, who is the guy who's supposed to have, quote, discovered Australia and New Zealand, that area of the world,
Yes.
was actually sponsored and funded and in fact controlled by the Royal Society, which was a Freemasonic and is a Freemasonic science operation based in London.
Yes, sir. Let me show you another interesting thing. There is a man I have been investigating in vain for over 40 years now. A man who committed acts of hideous genocide upon our people here in South Africa. A man of whom historians are so fond that he is practically a white cow whom you may not dare to point a finger at. If you see me sitting in front of you, a man who was demonized over 30 years ago by the South African news media, it was because I asked questions about this white man, Sir George Grey. Who was Sir George Grey? What was he? Was he a Freemason? Was he an Illuminati? How is it that this Sir George Grey, who is the actual founder of the most oppressive laws that British colonialism ever settled our people with, apartheid was laid down by Sir George Grey. The carrying of identity papers was laid down by Sir George Grey in the 1850s, in the last century. And Sir George Grey dealt our kings a mortal blow. But let me first tell you, this man was sent from London to quell a Maori rebellion in New Zealand, which had defeated the efforts of military men. The Maori were unstoppable. Their rebellion was blazing like a bushfire through New Zealand. But when George Grey was sent to New Zealand, he managed to quell this rebellion with very, very little loss of life. What did George Grey do? I have never been able to find a book which tells me exactly what did George Grey do in New Zealand in order to pacify the Maoris who had beaten the efforts of the British soldiers. Because that same George Grey was brought from New Zealand to South Africa in order to quell a great rebellion by the Xhosa people. And George Grey used outright trickery in order to force the Xhosa people to actually destroy themselves. George Grey deliberately and cold-bloodedly tricked the Xhosa people into slaughtering their own cattle, burning their own crops. It is one of the saddest stories of our country's blood-drenched history. And almost overnight, George Gray reduced the Xhosa people of the Eastern Cape into a nation of dying skeletal starvelings. Because after George Gray had manipulated the Xhosas with raw trickery into destroying their crops, destroying their cattle, he practically had them on the plate. Hunger, raw hunger and starvation achieved what military might had failed to achieve after many embattled decades. George Gray was a psychologist par excellence. George Gray was a trickster who knew the native races, and he knew how to exploit their beliefs to bring about their own destruction. Let me show you what Gray did. One day, when great tension was boiling up in the Cape, and when the colonialists were threatened by yet another border war between themselves and the Xhosa people, a number of Xhosa women, amongst them a Sangoma, a priestess diviner called Nongawuse, were tending crops when they heard voices calling out to them in the bush. Nongawuse, because she was a spiritual person and a healer, responded to these voices. She went together with her sister Nonteto to investigate, and they found a deep hollow in the ground, and from this hollow they heard the voices coming. And as the women knelt next to the hollow, the three amazing figures emerged from the grass. Tall men wearing long black robes made of animal skin, with very big hoods on their heads, appeared out of the hollow. And one of their faces were painted white, or so it seemed to the terrified Xhosa women. And these men were unusually tall. And they told the woman, Nongawuse, whom they distinguished by her attire as a traditional healer, that she must go to the Xhosa people and tell them to start killing their cattle and start destroying their crops. Mr. Ike, I want to show you this book, a book which was published many years ago, a book written by me, and which made me one of the most hated black men in South Africa by the white establishment. In this book, I write, amongst other things, about a man called Sir George Gray. And in this book, I questioned certain things about this man, because Sir George Gray was the creator of race discrimination and apartheid in South Africa. Apartheid was not really created by the Afrikaners. It was created by this man many years ago.
Well, Sir George Gray was Illuminati, a black magician, and fits the bill exactly with what happened in all these other countries you're talking about.
Say, when I questioned, when I raised questions in this book about Sir George Grey, I was savagely attacked by nearly every professor in various universities of South Africa.
The intellectual prostitutes, yeah.
Yes, the liars in ivory towers, as I call them. I said that the Xhosas did not commit suicide in 1857. They were murdered. They were manipulated by Sir George Grey into destroying themselves.
Isn't it interesting, Cradle? I've noticed this myself, that the story you just told about how those people were manipulated to kill their cattle and what have you, is mirrored again and again in the story that has spawned religion after religion. I mean, whether it's Mohammed or whether it's Joseph Smith with the Mormons, again and again, the initiator has a vision or an interaction with some guard figure or angel, and bingo, they get told to do certain things, and the rest is history.
Yes, sir. And what is most interesting is that these interesting angels have suddenly disappeared in recent times. You no longer hear of an angel coming to tell some prophet to establish a new religion. No. Where have they gone? They carefully choose certain times. Now, Sir George Grey, so let me go back to him. He manipulated the Xhosa people into killing themselves. And a poor woman, Nongqawuse, became the scapegoat, because in every evil thing that has been done in Africa by the white colonialists, as well as by the Arab colonialists, there are always black scapegoats who are left holding the blame. And in this case, Nongqawuse was. According to South African official history books, we are told that Nongqawuse had had a dream that her people must kill their cattle, her people must destroy their crops. And as a result of Nongqawuse's dream, thousands died. And another lie was added to compound this infamous lie. We were told that Nongqawuse had been a child when she had this dream. But that's a lie, sir. Photographs of Nongqawuse taken after the terrible disaster show her as a mature woman who is wearing a beaded blanket, and on that beaded blanket it is shown clearly in beaded patterns that she was a Sangoma who had undergone several initiations. She was not a girl, but a spinster woman in her 25th year. And Nongqawuse had not had a dream whatsoever, sir. She had seen apparitions. She had seen men who posed as gods, who were disguised as supernatural beings, and she had not been alone. And another thing, sir, the Xhosa people would never have listened to the word of any mature child on a serious matter like this, because to all African people, cattle and crops were not regarded as their property, but rather as the property of the ancestral spirits. Now, Nongqawuse became a scapegoat For a long, long time, our people hated Nongause for the dream she had supposedly had. And after I had brought questions about this story, after I had been torn apart by newspaper men, Nongause's story was suddenly changed and totally omitted in South African history books. I can show you some of these books where this story doesn't occur at all.
Cato, is this story that you're telling in this one incident, can you repeat that again and again across southern Africa as the Europeans took over? Was it a method they constantly used?
Yes, yes. You see, I can tell you a lot of things that were done. Some of the bloody wars which were started in South Africa between white men and black men were actually engineered by supposedly ancestral spirits, where a king suddenly saw an apparition.
Mm-hmm.
Now let me tell you, sir, one of these amazing stories, of which there are well over 100. And it is a true story that is known to every student of history in the land known as Lesotho. There was a great king, sir. The king's name was Muhlomi. Muhlomi was a priest king. He was a man who was both a healer and a king. Muhlomi was getting old, and he had received many wounds in battle, fighting to protect his people against invaders. One day, Muhlomi was in his house when somebody knocked on the door frame of the house. And Muhlomi asked the intruder to come in. And into their hut there came a frightening being, a being whose face was as white as the face of death, a being which wore a hood over its head, a being with unnaturally wide shoulders, a being who wore a long robe of sable antelope skin. This being squatted near the entrance of the hut in which Muhlomi was. And the being told Muhlomi that he was to take one of his golden earrings, the earrings of kingship, and go on foot for a long distance to find a young man known as Dipoko, and to give him this earring. But what are you saying, great one? Said Muhlomi, utterly terrified by this unearthly being. You are saying that I, Muhlomi, must go and find this boy and make him my successor? And the being said, yes, we, your forefathers, order you to do this. Muhlomi was thunderstruck. He tried to argue, because Muhlomi had sons whom he was hoping would succeed him after death. Now he was now being told to go and seek out a strange young man and make him future king of the Basotho people. And as Mutlomi tried to speak, the terrible tall being stood up in the hut and threw a handful of black powder on into the fireplace. There was a terrible flash, a burst of white smoke, and as Mutlomi shielded his eyes, the being left the hut. On the following day, Mutlomi told his people this in a council meeting, and the people advised Mutlomi to obey. You are the king, Mutlomi. You have been our king for a long time. You are blameless and you are as brave as a lion. But against the gods, what can you do? And thus it was that King Mutlomi was given a tame ox by his people, and he rode on the back of this ox, accompanied by 2 of his best warriors, and he went out to seek this strange boy whom he had been ordered to make future king of the Basothos. He found the boy with his companions high up on a mountain. The boy was a bandit. He lived by stealing cattle from rich men. He was a typical black Robin Hood. And Mutlomi greeted this boy, Diphoqo, and he pinned his golden earring to Diphoqo's right ear and said, I am commanded by the spirits of my forefathers to appoint you, Diphoqo, future king of the Basotho people. I am told that you are going to make this nation great. I am told that you are going to protect it. I, Mutlomi, the armed one, have spoken. Mutlomi left Diphoqo, and Mutlomi sickened and died some time later. And the man named Diphoqo, a young man, a cattle-stealing bandit, became known as King Moshoeshoe, the first of the Basotho people. As the so-called God had spoken, it so did happen. Moshoeshoe, who had now discarded the name of Diphoqo, which means disappointment, and assumed the name Moshoeshoe, which means the barber or the beard shaver. Moshoeshoe himself started seeing visions, and he started obeying the instructions of these visions that he should build a great nation out of the Basotho nation. He collected together all the fugitives who had fled from the wars in the Cape. He collected together all the refugees who had fled from the wars by Shaka in Natal, and he molded them into the nation known as the Basotho nation, which today inhabits the land called Lesotho. But wait, there is more to the story of Mushweshwe. Mushweshwe was under attack by the Afrikaners. And one day he received another vision, a vision that told him that if his people were to be saved, he had to place himself and his people under the protection of Queen Victoria. And he did just that. When I was a child, when I was a young scholar, the land today known as Lesotho was known as the Basotho Land Protectorate. Here was a king actually destroying his sovereignty as a ruler. Mushweshwe enjoyed the loyalty of his people. Mushweshwe was greatly loved by the nation that he had formed. Mushweshwe had not really needed to make himself the subordinate of the British Empire, but he did on advice of visions that he had.
My God, you can see how it was done.
But there is more, Mr. David Icke. Say, I think these men were secretly manipulated. I think these men had their fears and secret beliefs played against them. It is the easiest thing, sir, to manipulate a man who rules a country and who suddenly feels himself unsecure. For example, the British appear to have pursued a double-edged strategy in South Africa. They did it in Natal, they did it in Lesotho, and they did it in Swaziland and in Botswana. What did they do? They used to manipulate the white Afrikaner settlers, the Boers, into fighting the native people. And then they used to send agents to the embattled black kings to tell these black kings that the best thing that they could do is to place their people and themselves under the protection of the British Empire.
Problem, reaction, solution.
Yes, sir. Now, let me ask you, sir, how did a black king know that the English were the most militarily powerful people at that time? The Africans only saw their immediate enemy, the Afrikaners. The black people only saw the Boers traveling in their ox wagons. They only saw the muskets of the Boers. But here we have a situation where a black king learns from someone about the powerful ships, sea-going ships, and the huge guns that the British have got. And this king is then advised to place himself and his people under the protection of the British. It was a strategy that the British pursued in different forms deep into Africa. They often won huge swaths of mineral-rich territory without even firing a shot. They had gun runners who smuggled bundles of muskets, tower muskets, and even Sniper rifles to black tribes. And wars between the Afrikaners and the blacks came into being in Lesotho. One of the reasons that forced Moshoeshoe to make Lesotho a protectorate under Great Britain was because he feared the repeated attacks which the angry Boers were launching against him, because some of his people were attacking the Boer farmers and stealing their cattle.
Can we talk about people like David Livingstone and those that charted the interior of Africa, etc.? Because it seems, Credo, without question, we're looking at an unbroken stream here with one element of the takeover following another. So surely those, quote, heroes of Britain that charted the interior of Africa must have been involved in the story.
They were. They were. In fact, I can say to you now, sir, that the man in whose home Livingstone stayed, namely Reverend Moffat, was the one man who was grinding down King Khama's mind. He was the one man who used to send books and newspapers to Khama. They were living in the land of the Botswana, and they lived alone, a missionary and his wife. Reverend Moffat had a family of children at Kuruman in the Northern Cape. And Reverend Moffat received Livingstone. Reverend Moffat, because he was viewed by the Botswana as a man of God, could do what he liked in the land of the Botswana. He carved himself a huge stretch of land. He planted any vegetables or fruits there that he chose. Early in his arrival, he found that area teeming with buffaloes, which is why it is called Kuruman. It's really a corruption of the Botswana word Udumane, the gathering place of the buffaloes. Moffat used to welcome explorers and hunters, many of whom traveled alone through South Africa. And these hunters and adventurers, people like Reverend Campbell and others, were going through South Africa, exploring. Some of them wrote books about the local customs and the local tribes that they encountered. And I think these explorers were much more than what they seemed to be.
So how was Christianity used? We've talked about the fact that the beasts of the terrible blanket, these strange people that appeared before the Europeans, had introduced all the symbols and what have you that prepared people for Christianity in Africa. How was it used once the Christianity the Christian religion arrived?
I will tell you, sir, from what I saw as a young child. The Christian religion or rather the missionaries that brought it, behaved like dictators. They ill-treated our people. They humiliated them. And they stole huge tracts of land from our people using the name of Jesus Christ. I want to give you these historical facts. If you go to Natal, near Durban, and you come to a place called Marian Hill, near Durban, you will find one of the biggest and one of the oldest mission schools in South Africa. Marian Hill sits on huge tracts of land. These tracts of land were stolen from the Zulu people by a missionary called Chimlet. And even to this day, the people of Marian Hill can tell you that that man was not just a missionary, he was also a crook and a pitiless exploiter of the black people. He was a monk, but he was much more than a monk. It was said that this Chimlet worshipped not God, not the Virgin Mary, but Satan himself.
Well, that fits like a glove from the way the Illuminati work. And the other thing that must have happened, fundamental in so many ways, is that the original knowledge, the knowledge that you carry and people like you carry, must have been destroyed, pushed underground, and basically the true story of history lost.
Yes, sir. Let me tell you what the missionaries did. The missionaries used to employ the tactic of preaching the so-called gospel to our people. And at the same time, they used to manipulate our people into partying with some of their holiest relics. Please, sir, there is in London a place that I saw near the London docks in an obscure street. It is a heavily guarded warehouse which belongs to the British Museum of Humankind.